Alright everybody, hello and welcome back to French Island, another episode of the Other FIFA podcast. We are slowly getting in the habit of saying the names correctly in the lead up, and I will do a much better introduction this week than I did last week because it couldn't really get any worse than that. It's been another huge week of football action around Australia. We've had FFA Cup action, we've got some huge ties confirmed coming up for the next few weeks, which we're all very excited about down here in Victoria. There's been a bunch of different action around international football as well with the recent international break. The A-League men and women off-season continues to rumble forward. Paramount Plus has been in the headlines for a variety of really good reasons. There's been just a heap of stuff happening, and thankfully I don't have to recap it all and remember it all on my own because I've got the Killer Bee himself, Branson Gibson, joining us. Bran, how has your week been? Thanks for jumping in again.
Week's been good, mate. It's been a fun week here on the island. As you said, mate, there's always lots of football to talk about, so looking forward to getting into it, mate.
Yeah, and really, there's no time like the present because if we don't start trying to get through some of these headline items, we're going to be here for another 4.5 hours trying to cover it all. So let's jump straight in. Headlines of the week. What have you got for us this week, Branson? What have we had happen in the football world?
Well, the first thing we're going to talk about, mate, is the FFA Cup. Last weekend, we saw Adelaide United taking on Adelaide Olympic. It was Adelaide United who emerged victorious and clinched themselves a quarterfinals berth, and they also clinched a little bit of history as well, mate. They set a new record. They broke the winning streak record for Australian National Cup game wins with 12 wins in a row. So pretty impressive feat. It was great to see football back. It was on Sunday afternoon on Channel 10. I liked it. I thought it was a pretty good time. It was a good watch and it was a good game. What did you think of it?
Yeah, it was a decent little game. That's been the interesting part about this FFA Cup ties, or set of ties in particular, because I think over the last kind of 2 or 3 years we haven't really had that giant killing result that's happened in a couple of seasons. Adelaide have fallen victim to that before, as have Central Coast, as have Melbourne Victory, Perth Glory. Like, there's been a few different times where these NPL teams have really kind of surprised the A-League opposition. Some of that's down to the fact that these A-League sides are in the middle of like a 12-week pre-season program, whereas the NPL teams are effectively coming off the end of their seasons. But what's been slightly different this year is most NPL competitions have finished. And I think Adelaide Olympics' last game was about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And similar before that, Adelaide actually played Florida Athena from WA a couple of weeks prior, and their game or their grand final match had just been the week before. So we're in a weird environment where different states have had different regulations, different changes relating to their games, which of course has created big difficulties. But still, each of the low league sides or the NPL sides that we've seen come through have really put up a good challenge. This wasn't all Adelaide United just dominating play. Of course, they kept a lot of the ball. Of course, they looked a bit sharper, I think, in the opening 15 to 20 minutes. But, like Adelaide Olympic really held their own at various points and did quite well. They've got a couple of good young players, a couple of teenagers in their starting lineup that look to be very good prospects, a couple of ex-Adelaide United junior and academy players also in that group, which is exciting to see that kind of South Australian production line continuing back in the NPL level. And they had huge moments in the game as well. They had a great chance from a corner. They had a penalty that was saved as well from Ben Halloran. So plenty for the Olympic fans to be proud of in terms of their run. And for Adelaide, that record-breaking success they've had. They've won the competition in 2018, 2019, and then of course last season we didn't have the FFA Cup competition. So it's a pretty impressive run, and they're really becoming, I think, the form side in terms of cup competitions within Australia. But what did you make of the match?
Well, I agree with your assessment where it was 1-0, but I thought that Olympic, certainly held their own. I thought the penalty save was obviously a big moment, swung a bit of momentum their way. Unfortunately, they couldn't quite find a goal to force extra time, but I still thought it was a good game. I still thought it was a good watch. It was interesting that you mentioned the restrictions as well, and how this year the tournament's just a little bit different. In previous years, it sort of favoured NPL sides where, it is late on in their seasons, but, they've got plenty of match fitness. They're red hot. They're into it. Whereas A-League sides, it's the middle of their off season. So I think if some of the games had been played when they originally were meant to be played, I think the Victory were meant to play Perth, and at that stage they just cut a whole bunch of people off their squads. So it would have been interesting to see who they would have rolled out there. So I think because, the A-League clubs are, of course, professional clubs, they've been able to train all the way through. The fixtures have been pushed back, so it's more in line with their pre-season. So we've started to see that advantage that NPL clubs had swing back the other way, and I think that's part of the reason why, as you said, we haven't seen much in the way of cup sets. But that was last weekend's game. There are more FFA Cup games in store. There's one coming up this weekend. Lions FC will be taking on Brisbane Roar on Sunday, 3:30 p.m. local kickoff time. One of the quirks of having this sort of region-specific things is, this region-specific draw is we're getting a lot of local rivalries. Do you think that's good or bad? I mean, it's almost in a way not fake, but it's a little bit artificial, but I still think it's exciting.
Yeah, like I think the change has been good. So not just I think COVID's probably had a bigger impact on the regional draw side of things. But even then, this is the first cup competition we've had since the APL made the decision that teams that finish in like 9th, 10th, 11th and 12th would have to play extra games to actually qualify for the cup. So I think technically Adelaide are like 3 games ahead of where Melbourne, Victory and Perth would be comparatively because of the way that the draws are played out and because of different state-based restrictions. The Lions game that you mentioned and Raw match, that's going to be fascinating because both of those clubs can trace their roots back to the same original club, Hollandia, in Brisbane. So they're both where the Orange Lions FC actually kind of ceased to exist once the Raw jumped into the A-League and then came back up again as an NPL club. So effectively they are kind of the same team, just 2 different offshoots that kind of worked into the national and then NPL competition, which I'm sure for Lions fans that have stuck around that side of the club is going to be huge. They obviously both have massive Dutch influences. It is one of the clubs that Warren Moon managed at prior to getting the job with Brisbane Roar. So it's just all these fantastic narrative threads that we see in like the FA Cup in England, just backgrounds of history, geographical rivalries, all that sort of stuff. We're really getting that in this competition more than we have in a while. So I think a lot of the people that are desperate to get the national second division set up and see more of these NPL versus A-League ties and see more of these underdog stories, they're really kind of getting that itch scratched, maybe not like entirely, but a little bit with some of these cup competition draws that are being thrown out. So I think it's fantastic for the league. The only hope is, you mentioned the Victory in Perth earlier, they're having a bit of a back and forward spat about what should happen with that game and who should have to forfeit and all that sort of thing. And yeah, I don't very often defend Melbourne Victory, but it's not their fault they can't get into Perth. Perth's government has locked down the border and they can't get in. Like, they would go there and play the game, I think, if they could. At the same time, Perth refusing to change the host venue to not be a home game for them. Randomly, the Adelaide City chairman, Greg Griffin, has chimed in thinking that the game needs to be forfeited by Melbourne Victory, but again, it's not their fault. Like, it's a tough scenario and situation. It wouldn't shock me if we end up seeing maybe like a smaller hub type model to get some of these games caught up, because realistically, some of the competition is waiting for those matches to get played and caught up. The big one, though, that we haven't spoken about, Brand, that you and I are desperate to be at on November 12th, is the old Oceanic Team of the Century from the year 2000, South Melbourne, playing against reigning A-League champions and premiers, Melbourne City. That one should be absolutely huge. Is that another one that you're looking forward to as well?
Well, absolutely. That's probably the biggest match in the Victorian grouping. That does lead nicely, though, because we do have a bunch of fixtures that have been confirmed recently. The dates have been locked in. They are coming up. The first one, aside from the round of 16 clash between Lions FC and Brisbane Roar. The next batch of games, we've got Mount Druitt Town Rangers taking on Wollongong Wolves on Saturday, November 6th. Wednesday 10th sees Victorian NPL sides Hume City and Port Melbourne do battle. Also on the 10th, we got Broadmeadow Magic from New South Wales taking on Western Sydney Wanderers. Friday the 12th, as you said, South Melbourne FC taking on Melbourne City. That's tasty for so many reasons. On that Saturday, we've got Blacktown City taking on the Central Coast Mariners, Newcastle Olympic taking on Macarthur FC. Later on in the month, Wednesday, the 24th of November, we've got Tigers FC from the ACT taking on New South Wales NPL side RPA Leichhardt, and Sydney Olympic taking on Sydney FC. So, I mean, in that batch overall, there's a couple of huge games. Sydney Olympic taking on Sydney FC. That's going to be massive as well. We mentioned South Melbourne against Melbourne City. Any other ones jump out from that list to you, mate?
Really just the two that you called out. Like, we're desperately hoping that we hit 90% vaccination in Victoria so that we can go along to that FFA Cup match, because that'd be huge. So if you are listening and haven't yet, please get vaccinated, because I want to watch the football. So that's really the big hope. And Lakeside as a venue have been crying out. Or, well, let's be clear, like South Melbourne as a venue, as a club, they believe that they are still one of the biggest clubs in Australia, and they have been crying out at every expansion opportunity to get themselves an A-League licence. I think they were quite miffed that they didn't get one originally, given their success in the previous NSL competition. So it's huge for them to be hosting an A-League side from within Melbourne, to really hopefully put up a competitive display, and then at the same time show that they can manage crowds of 5,000 to 6,000 people, hopefully, if we're allowed, depending on COVID limitations and all that sort of stuff. So it's huge for them. I think it's also huge for Melbourne City, because like we will not hear the end of it ever if Melbourne City falter or start a step at any point throughout the course of this match. Like, they need to be switched on from the off and to really set down a marker for how they're going to try and defend their league titles this season. And they'll of course want to be competitive on all fronts as well. I draw similar parallels between this game and the Sydney Olympic match with Sydney FC. That's going to be huge. A lot of the Olympic fans that are across on Soccer Twitter, I'm sure they'll be rational and reasonable on Twitter regardless of the result. But, you know, that's another huge one of the old era of football really meeting up with the current and present elite tier. So just fascinating contest. And even the smaller matches that we've seen between some of the NPL sides playing either within their state or against other state opposition, they've been fantastic content as well. We'll talk a little bit more about 10 in a moment, but like the way that they've presented this program, like the competition, the way that they've given the competition time and different commentary voices and local voices and all that sort of stuff. One of my big highlights was listening to Travis Dodd, who was an A-League player who went back into the NPLSA structure, talk through this game and really try and draw those lines and parallels between the A-League competition and the NPL competition as it currently stands. Like, we're learning more, I think, about these NPL clubs in greater detail than we ever have before in the previous sports coverage. So fantastic to see. I love the FA Cup. Hopefully it continues being the real curtain raiser to the A-League season, which we hope goes on to go bigger and better things again this year.
Definitely a couple of quick little FFA Cup things that we want to touch on before we move on. You mentioned the disparity at where teams are at in the competition. Perth, the Victory, Newcastle Jets and Western United technically haven't even qualified for the round of 32. This is the first time we've seen those bottom four sides have to play off to reach the round of 32, so they're not even in it yet. And meanwhile, Adelaide have advanced to the quarterfinals. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Something else that we saw released this week as well. They've done it before, but the Central Coast Mariners have once again released their special FFA Cup kit. There you go. Is that up on the screen? We can see it there. That's the red version. Beautifully placed there by you, Sean. There is also a white version as well. Don't know if we have the image of that. It's just the red, but imagine the white. For those listening on the podcast, it's a red shirt, and then it's got in the bottom quarter panel, what would you call that? A bunch of C's? I don't know. It's a throwback to their Coastie era.
Yeah, the Coastie Cup kit is effectively what they're referring to it as. I will try and find the white kit here while we kind of go through this portion. But yeah, they did do this similarly in 1920. And, you know, like they had a pretty decent little run at that stage. I'll actually grab this image. We're doing this one on the fly. Usually I'm better prepared than this, Branson, but we can...
The C as well that's on the kit, it's a bunch of red and blue C's. That is the same C that is in their logo that normally encompasses the ball, for what it's
correct.
worth. If you can picture, that's last year's. That's not even this year's.
Yeah, but the diagonal, like, kind of logo design with the different sizes and stuff is kind of throwing back to this particular kit. I can't find the white image immediately, so we might have to retweet that one at a later date. But yeah, shout out to Marty Mariner as well, because I've just ripped all these pictures straight off his Twitter page, because he's always the first person we go to for anything related to the Mariners. Go and check him out over on Twitter. But yeah, like, fantastic initiative. I quite enjoy these kind of custom kits that come out every couple of years. Some clubs are better at doing it than others because, you know, like different templates, different suppliers, all that sort of stuff. But credit to Central Coast. They're trying to like engage some of that fan base we spoke about last week in their season preview. Like, they're really trying to get the local community in and around their team and supporting them. So hopefully they do well. Hopefully it's not a kit that we see one time out there on the pitch and they actually get a decent little run in the comp this year.
Yeah, absolutely. We are going to move on, though. That's enough on the FFA Cup for this week. We're going to talk about headline number 2, which was Channel 10 this week. They've done a lot of good stuff. We saw them come out with a unique promo ad, sort of hyping the upcoming A-League men and A-League women's season. What do you think of the ad, first off?
Yeah, it was good. I think they really focused on highlighting the best point of differentiation that football has compared to other sports in Australia, which is really that fan voice and that fan support. So it was the "I just can't get enough" chant that I think every club's active support uses across the league at various points.
It's a football anthem. It's a good song choice, you know?
It is. It absolutely is. So I think that's really what they were trying to highlight, that the fans are the lifeblood of the game and the colour and the atmosphere and all that sort of stuff you don't get within, Australian rules football or any of the rugby codes or anything like that. And I think that's a real strength of the game that needs to be highlighted further. And potentially, because of the limitations of being on pay TV, broadcasting previously wasn't always highlighted in the most popular light. So yeah, I thought that ad itself was fantastic. It really shone a light on all the best parts of the league itself. Shout out again to Central Coast Mariners, who I think are the only club not featured at any point in that, which came up a little bit on Twitter. And shout out to the random two Western United fans that apparently live underneath a bridge in Brisbane, which I think we all kind of giggled at a little bit on soccer Twitter as well. But what did you make of the ad itself?
I thought it was good. I thought overall it was good. I liked it. I thought it was clean. I thought it was good. It got some juices flowing, for the upcoming season. You're like, all right, yep, cool, here we go. I thought the imagery that they used was pretty good. Of course, there was some classic sort of, not peak A-League moments, but like all things A-Leagues. It sort of had a couple of, what's the word? I don't know, like not cringe, but you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. No, it's definitely cringe. There were 100% little cringeworthy moments that come in, but that's what the A-League is. That's why it's the best league in the world, because we have all these moments and we just roll with them. And really, we just kind of move on to the next cringe moment that comes up the week after. So yeah, there were definitely... I don't think that was a pub full of Wellington Phoenix fans. I think those were paid extras that just happened to get kits and scarves and everything. But I kind of like that. Because I think it is an accurate representation of what this league is like a lot of the time.
Yeah, well, the ones that's there for me was, as you said, the Mariners not making it all. Apparently, the Jets were in there for like less than a second. I think it was like A-League memes that the entire ad went for 100 seconds, and they actually timed how long each team was on the screen for. The Mariners did not make it at all, and I think the Jets were less than a second, so that's fun. The bridge that the Western United fans were on is actually in Brisbane. Not in Melbourne, so that's fun as well. And what was it? Always West was the sign they unfurled, and of course, everyone on soccer Twitter had a bit of fun with that. Plenty of good Photoshop saying, sorry, pardon me, listening everywhere they play, all the different stadiums. So that was pretty good. But overall, I liked the ad. The other big news, though, that we saw coming out from Channel 10 was they sort of announced more additions to their commentary team for the upcoming season. The big one was presenter Tara Rushton, who, along with Simon Hill, a lot of people in the soccer Twitter community were calling out that Channel 10 should go out and sign her as well, bring her across from Fox Sports. That's finally happened. That's a pretty huge addition as well, one that fans certainly wanted. Sean, what do you make of the lineup? What do you make of Tara's announcement, and the commentary team in general? Because it does look pretty good.
Yeah, it does look good. To be honest, I'm torn. Don't get me wrong, Tara Rushton's fantastic. I think it's great that she's going to be in and involved around football, and she's obviously a fan and cares about it quite deeply. So it's always good to see those people that have passion for that, like for the game and for the industry, and a good background knowledge set. But there is a large chunk of this commentary team that we've already seen on Fox Sports. So it's not really highlighting a lot of new voices. And I think that's one of the things that Simon Hill actually tweeted out and touched on, that he doesn't expect himself and Andy Harper to be on commentary for every single game, 5 games a week or 6 games a week or whatever it happens to be. So I would expect there's going to be some additional faces, and I would love to see people like Ben Homer, Teo Pellizzeri, who are fantastic commentators at an NPL level in their own right, given opportunities at this broadcasting level. But I'll run you through the group, and maybe you can pick out your favourite for me, Brand. So we've got ex-Socceroos Luke Wilkshire and Mark Milligan on the left-hand side there. The voice of Australian football, Simon Hill, of course, their first real marquee kind of signing. Georgie Yeoman Dale, who's going to be an active W League player and presenter at the same time, which is a pretty decent way to kind of get coverage and exposure on the team. MasterChef's own Archie Thompson, that's of course his greatest career achievement. Tara Rushton, who we already mentioned. Bruce Jitte, Neve Owens, apologies if I butchered the pronunciation of that, but I listened to her in a couple of the Matildas build-up games and she was excellent. Amy Chapman, ex-Matilda, Andy Harper, of course, and then Alex Brosk and studio presenter Scott McKinnon. So it's a decent little group. Who do you think are the biggest names or the people that you're most looking forward to hearing from over the next year?
Well, it's an obvious one, but I mean, Simon Hill leaves out. He's just a fantastic commentator. So everyone was obviously very excited when he got confirmed for Channel 10. He's probably the number one. I also like Bruce Jitte, to be honest. Listening to him and some of the stuff he said, not just in commentary on TV and stuff, but just around the league in general, I think has been really good. I think he did a lot of good stuff when he was involved with Adelaide United as well. So I'm looking forward to hearing more of him.
Yeah, and I think Adelaide were really disappointed that he moved on to a different role, working for the city of Adelaide. So he's obviously passionate about that area, but fantastic that he no longer has that club conflict of interest and we can hear more from him because he's clearly a very intelligent dude. I quite like Alex Brosk as well. I think of the ex-Socceroos, Luke Wilshire, Mark Milligan and Alex Brosk that have kind of come into this presenting format, I think he says some really intelligent things and I think he understands the game quite well, which we don't always get the best exposure to when they're players because for, however long at Fox Sports, we don't get player interviews and we don't get much player exposure other than social media that's run by the clubs themselves. So I think he's been absolutely fantastic as well. And one day, Branson, we will do the ultimate Twitter poll to who had the better Australian football beard, him or Mile Jedinak. But that thing is absolutely glorious. It's taking on a life of its own. But yeah, all exciting stuff. And really, I don't think there are any criticisms of anything that 10 has done relating to football. The one thing is really we want to see Paramount Plus maybe improve a little bit as a platform, but as far as their content offering, as far as the allocation of time, the fact that they're playing the advert we spoke about during shows like The Bachelor and The Project and whatever else, like we're going to have more eyes on this season of the A-League than potentially we've ever had before just by the strength of that TV rights deal. And fantastic to see 10 really kind of backing up their investment with the best people available in football. It looks like it's going to be another fantastic year.
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking forward to seeing what the product is. They've done an excellent job so far. Totally agree. Looking forward to the season ahead. We do have a couple of more headlines that we're just going to touch on quickly, mate. Adelaide United. We spoke about them before in the FFA Cup section. They made headlines as well. They released a new third jersey. As you know, mate, I'm a big fan of kits. What do you make of this one? It's an all pink number again for those who are listening on the podcast. Listening rather than watching. It's all pink. It's not a vibrant pink. It's a bit more of a pastel kind of color. It's got a white color, white sleeves, and then the league's badge, the club logo, and everything. All the sponsors are in red. It's pretty darn good. I like it.
Yeah, I think Motura and Cassini Yangi did a wonderful job modelling it, but I'll just hide them behind there so people can actually see the kit. Yeah, it's very like strawberry and cream vibes. One of the things that they haven't done, it's a great kit, make no mistake. I think it's fantastic, and I think it will be very well represented and supported, provided that they wear it more than one time. They did a similar thing last year, their third kit, the Malls Balls kit, I absolutely loved. But one of my criticisms of UCAN and Adelaide is that all of their promo work, it never shows the shorts and the socks with it. And they can make and break a good kit. Like all of their promos are always them wearing it in like a cafe setting or walking the street with jeans.
Fashion.
Yeah, so I think there's a line that Adelaide and probably Western Sydney have taken over the last 2 years where they care more about their kit being a street fashion item than an actual like on-field apparel item. And then you kind of compare that with the Brisbane kit, which we were super favourable with, and the Melbourne City kit, which the sash and all that sort of stuff, they present that as being their on-field merchandise rather than, an off-field accessory. So I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying one's better than the other, but I would love to know if this has got like red shorts and like a pinky or white sock combo, it's going to look fantastic. If it's all this one shade, it's probably a bit, samey compared to the rest of their other kits, which we know their home kit's an all red number. So yeah, it's decent. Do I need to get the whiteboard out? Are we going to try and retroactively rate this one against the other kits?
We don't have to get the whiteboard out. We can just go for an audible acknowledgement of the score. I'm gonna give it a 9.
Yeah, I'm going to give it an 8, but I put a little asterisk next to that 8 because if it's got a good short and sock combo, I do think it starts to hit a 9. It's nice. It's just a good colorway. It complements, I think, the existing Adelaide red without doing anything like too bold. Like even though they're ugly sometimes, I kind of dig ugly kits every now and then. I really enjoyed the McDonald's kit last year that they had. We did a tweet yesterday.
I don't think it was bad.
Yeah, it wasn't bad. We did a tweet yesterday about the original A-League kits, and some of them are hideous, but I still kind of like that they're hideous, I think depending on the results they get, depending on how often they wear it, this could be one of those kits that kind of goes down in A-League folklore as being one that fans kind of call back to. Melbourne City just got their Heart Sash kit back. Maybe in 5-6 years' time, Adelaide United fans will look at this one that they really want to get that strawberry and cream kit back out there on the park again. But good stuff again from UK and great stuff from Adelaide as always.
Absolutely. One last quick mention headline that we're going to talk about before we move on to our season previews. The Matildas, mate. The Matildas are back in action this weekend. They will be taking on Brazil Saturday night in Sydney. Huge game for multiple reasons. One, it's I think the Matildas' first game back on Australian soil in 2 years or something close to that. And also there will be fans allowed. So not only is it a match against a massive opponent, but it's going to be good for so many reasons. It'll be on Channel 10 as well. It'll be prime time Saturday night viewing. We spoke before about the Channel 10 commentary team as well. So that's going to be massive, of course. Fans back in action and back on Australian soil. This is going to be a big one, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we spoke about with the Socceroos last week, Graham Arnold's kind of impassioned plea to try and get fans back in the stadiums and try and get New South Wales is the only one willing to do it, but trying to get around kind of the 2-week quarantine requirement that's been mandated at a national level. So it's exciting because most of the Matildas have just flown in over the last couple of days to get their training sessions in before the matches. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it goes, and depending on the success with both the crowd figures and potentially the movement of players in and out of quarantine, it will really determine how not just the Matildas, continue build towards the 2023 World Cup, but how, the men's side can continue their progression towards the Qatar World Cup, how the Olyroos are going to go in the next few weeks. There was a squad announced for that during the course of the week as well. So there's a lot of stuff happening, and hopefully it is the first step towards us being able to get out and support our national teams at all levels, in stadiums with fans there. And, like we've said, Channel 10 doing all the right things, putting it on the main channel on Saturday night. We can't really ask for a better platform for arguably our most successful international team. So yeah, it should be cracker. I can't wait.
Absolutely. They are also taking Brazil on again next week. They play them twice. So Saturday night, 7:50, is when it kicks off. And then they're playing Brazil again on Tuesday night at 8:05. So a double dose of Matildas versus Brazil action. We will talk about those games in more detail next week. We'll obviously recap the results and chat about everything that happened. But, mate, that wraps up the headline section. We are going to jump into our season previews. And so continuing on with our trend, we've just been going down the ladder. Next up is Adelaide United, mate.
Yeah, Adelaide as a side, I think are a lot of people's second favourite team, or a team that people don't begrudge offering. Obviously, there's a competitiveness between kind of Perth and Adelaide as our westernmost capital cities. There's a competitiveness, I think, with Melbourne that just goes down to historic detail between those two sides, old state of origins, all that sort of stuff. As I watch you just choke on water in the background while you're on mute,
I just love the idea of the westernmost capital city rivalry. Wow, what a title to fight it out for. Woo.
We know Australian football, or particularly Australian football administrators, are obsessed with anything Western related. Western Sydney, Western United. If they can get a Western derby going, then they're going to be absolutely thrilled about it. Adelaide's
not further west than Darwin, so once Darwin get a team in the league, they'll sort of usurp that Western. Anyway. Carry on.
Well, we're going to have to get a protractor out or something, because curvature of the Earth, maybe they are technically more... I don't know. We'll figure that out one day. But as far as the current A-League sides go, I think Adelaide are always pretty well received. A lot of people praise the stuff that they do with their community engagement. We've spoken about on this podcast before how good they are at really representing their community and fan base. They don't ever really release anything or put anything together that isn't well received within their community or within their fans. There's very rare backlash. We don't know who owns them. We don't don't know what their kind of shady Chinese sister club relationship is about anymore, but they do the majority of the good work in and around the league itself. And some would argue the kind of South Australian promotion of players that they've been doing over the last few years is largely being adopted by other clubs in the division. We spoke about Brisbane last week and their kind of model of doing that. We spoke about Central Coast potentially looking to do something similar for New South Wales NPL players. So in many ways, Adelaide are a big trendsetter in this league. But what are some of your thoughts and memories on the Reds as a team?
I don't mind them. And I think that's sort of what you were talking about before, where not a lot of people have a dislike for them. In terms of a rivalry sense as well, they've got, what is it, the original rivalry between Adelaide United and the Victory, but that, of course, has sort of been notched down a couple of pegs, at least from a Victory standpoint, with, you know, the Melbourne Derby and obviously Western United coming in. Not that that's a huge rivalry yet, but again, you've got that local factor, and then the Big Blue. So Adelaide United sort of find themselves outside when it comes to like rivalry round or whatever. If you have to pick, you know, each club's biggest rival, they would pick the Victory probably, but I don't think anyone would pick them. So I guess that means a lot of people have a soft spot for them. And I think the big thing that they've done recently as well is they seem to be doing a lot of things right off the field. There's talks of redevelopments around Hindmarsh as well. Bruce Dutte, we spoke about him before when he was involved with Adelaide United. He seemed to say a lot of great things, and the club seemed to be doing a lot of great things off the park as well. We mentioned their kit game as well. Just the way that they've been able to incorporate the city and the state of South Australia into their branding and what they do, even if it's not a part of the kit itself, just sort of where things are filmed as well. So I quite like the Reds. I think this is going to be a very interesting season for them, because I think they could, you know, climb the table, or they could plummet down. To be absolutely honest, it really is on a knife edge for them.
Yeah, and Coopers is one of the best away trips in the league. If you haven't managed to get Coopers on your bucket list yet, as far as away trips are to watch your team, like, go and do it. Their away bay's awesome. It's like in the back corner at one of the goal ends, so it's always fun when one of your team, or when your team scores and can peel away to that corner flag down that end of the stadium. It's also just, when it's full, it is one of the best kind of, really the archetype boutique stadium. When people talk about clubs needing like 10K rectangular stadiums, Coopers is kind of the one that most people point to as being really the standard that's set. So hopefully the development they're getting for the World Cup also helps improve that environment quite a bit. But last season, Brian, as you mentioned, a 5th place finish, a win versus Brisbane away at Redcliffe in the final series, and then a loss to Sydney FC in the semi-final, robbing them of a grand final spot. Of their year last season, how they performed, not some good results, some bad results. I'm not sure how much of their fan base would have looked at 5th place as being a success, given where they sat at various points throughout the year. But what do you think their season highlight would have been?
I think the season highlight has to be that finals win against Brisbane, to be honest. Finishing 5th, you know, away from home, Brisbane, I think were a better side than Adelaide last season. I think Brisbane looked the better side for most of the game as well, but it was 2 Tommy Urich goals 5 minutes apart. The second one was an absolute banger, a run down the wing, and then a spectacular finish as well. Adelaide were good value in that game. They were able to really shut up shop after Brisbane were hammering on the door looking for an equaliser, but they were resilient. They were able to hold on, get a big win away from home. I don't think a lot of people would have predicted that result. I would have thought that, you know, Brisbane would get up as the home side. So I think they can really hang their hat on that. You know, their regular season form left a bit to be desired, but that big finals win was huge. And then, you know, they held their own against Sydney for the most part. But what's your season highlight?
I think probably the way that they managed to get... So we spoke about last year, or a lot of people spoke about around the league, how different rookie coaches were going to handle the jump from NPL football or from youth level coaching into jumping in the A-League as well. And I think they did have like little rough patches. They took a little while to get going. I think their first game last season was like a pretty basic 0-0 draw against Western United, where it looked like potentially it was going to be a difficult season for them because they just weren't creating a whole lot. And they had a lot of young players coming through that that were making mistakes, but they got through it. I think Carl Vart got through it. I think he'll be a better manager and coach this season, knowing the standards that are required and having learnt some tactical lessons. And then, yeah, similar to what you said, like that finals win, I think them getting through to the final four in the competition would have been big for them. I think they would have potentially looked at Sydney as being a side that they could get at and really can measure themselves against. So, yeah, I think it's good for them. We'll talk about it a little bit further with some of their players out and in as to how they've improved and how they've changed in the off-season. But I think they'll look back at it as being a relatively successful season. Maybe they want to take the next step and get into the top four this year or get some consistency in that. Switching across to their greatest frustration, I think that would be their inconsistency, and that they weren't really able to make Coopers the fortress that it has been in previous seasons. Like the year that they won the league, they started the season poorly, but then after that there was no one that took points off them at Cooper Stadium. They really turned that into like a really difficult place to play, and I think maybe that disappeared at various points last year where teams looked at it as saying we can go to Adelaide and we can get points. But what do you think they look back on from last season as being the most frustrating element that they're looking to try and correct this year?
Oh, it's absolutely their inconsistency. You mentioned the way that they started off the season. You're right, a pretty uninspiring 0-0 draw with Western United. They backed that up with a 2-0 win over Melbourne City and then followed that up with a 3-5 loss with Perth Glory. So in that first three games, you have boring draw, surprising great win, and then a disastrous loss. At certain points last year as well, if we're talking about their inconsistency, they had 3 straight losses early on in the season. They backed that up with 6 wins in a row, if you don't mind. And then after that, though, they only had 1 win in their next 8 games. So that sort of sums up their season overall. 3 straight defeats, win 6 in a row, then 1 win in your next 8. So that's... I think that's going to be their biggest frustration, that they weren't able to sort of capture some of that form that they had in those 6 straight wins and, carry that on later on in the season. So I think I think that's their biggest frustration biggest frustration for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. You got there in the end. We stumble, we cartwheel, we roll through, we do a little roly-poly and we keep on going. But yeah, like I don't think many people backed them to actually get the win against Brisbane in Brisbane that they got in the final series, because their form leading into the final series kind of saw them fall down the table. There were discussions at various levels across soccer Twitter that they could potentially sneak into the top 2. And then they kind of stumbled home a little bit. They lost the home final, which I'm sure they would have looked at. Yeah, go for it.
They had 3 wins in their last 12 games heading into the finals, which is not lighting the world on fire.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure a lot of people would have been backing Brisbane to win that match at home, but then they got a good result. But again, like you mentioned, like that consistency, being able to do that on a regular basis over the course of a season, defeats are going to happen. Like we haven't had in A-League an invincible side at any point, and some of that comes down to how level the league is and the salary cap and all that sort of stuff. But I think they'll really be looking to try and get some consistency, particularly around their home form. I think if they can do that, they'll be in for good shape. But it has been a season of change for Adelaide United. They've had quite a few players depart, some experienced heads, some first-team players, and some big shoes to fill this year. But firing through them quickly, Michael Morone has actually retired from full-time football. He's now playing back in NPL competitions. Ryan Strain made the jump over to Israel, I think with Maccabi Haifa. I could be wrong on that one. Correct me in the comment section below. Ange Costanzo's son Dominic was highly voted as being a young prospect coming through, but never really made the grade in the league itself. Pacific Nyongabiri, probably just the victim of them having 4 or 5 very, very good wingers. He's made the jump across to Perth. Young left back Noah Smith has made the move across the Central Coast to try and get some starting football. He did start the season last year, starting for Adelaide, but then lost his position relatively quickly with the arrival of Harvey Lopez. Youngsters Yared Abatu, Dakota Ochensam, and have also departed. Jordan Elsey has left. He's made the jump across to Newcastle Jets. That would be an interesting code swap. Tommy Urich has made the jump to Macarthur. Big asterisk over that one because he is apparently one of the players that's potentially not getting vaccinated and might not actually play that many games this season. And then probably the most surprising of the bunch, it happened 2 weeks ago, Al Hassan Toure had his contract mutually terminated and he makes the jump across to Macarthur, which I think surprised a ton of people, particularly Adelaide fans who potentially looked at him as being one of the long-term futures of the club. Of those players out, Bram, which name jumps out at you the most and which one do you think is the biggest hole that Adelaide have to fill this off-season?
I think Tommy Urich is going to be an interesting one. He sort of played as that number 9. He only had 7 goals, I think, in the regular season last year. So he wasn't necessarily prolific, but I think, with their wingers, the way that he was able to sort of set that up, I think that'll be an interesting way to see how they go about that. Craig Goodwin sort of playing off him a little bit, so that obviously leaves a hole. And then Al Hassan Toure is an interesting departure as well. We were talking about this before we started. You got a bit of a theory on Al Hassan leaving. What is it?
Yeah, there was an interview afterwards with the Adelaide coaching staff, and it highlighted that he wanted to play in a wide position, not as a central striker, which is, to me, didn't make sense. When I read it and saw that he departed, I thought maybe they've not got, like, they brought in, we'll talk about their players but they brought in players to play as central strikers. They've also got his brother Mo, who played a lot of minutes last season, sometimes ahead of Al Hassan, who was on the bench. Tommy Urich, you mentioned, didn't actually play that much last year. He struggled to get fit quite often, but when he could play, he kind of changed the dynamic because he's a bit more of a target man as opposed to Al Hassan, who's a bit more of like off the shoulder, getting behind type striker. I thought that, in addition to the emergence of Cassini Yengi, meant that he wanted to play centrally and he wanted to get himself to a club where he could play as a central striker. So it was fascinating to me that they came out after and said he wanted to play in a wide position, because I don't know if that is where we've seen most of his best football in the A-League. I don't know if it's where he's played for the Ollie Roos either. He's usually led the line if he is in that squad and in that team. So a very, very interesting one, and very interesting that Macarthur is the destination that he's chose to go to, because Tommy Urich is there as well. So if Urich is fit, able to play and vaccinated, get yourself sorted out, Tommy. You'd think Al Hassan would be behind him as well. But if he wants to play in wide positions, they've also got Ulysses Devia, who they've added. They've also got Craig Noon, who they've added. They've also got young wide players like Michael Roosh and Liam Rose, Lockie Rose, apologies to Liam and Lockie's respective families, who are already there in that position as exciting young players. So to me, it's a fascinating move. I'll be very interested to look back at the end of the season and see how much Al Hassan has actually played and what position he's played in as well, because that's a big one. I'd also give a shout out to Jordan Elsey. He has been, when we shared the video of them lifting the 2018 FFA Cup trophy, he was in the starting lineup then. He's been a consistent performer, the big giraffe at the back for Adelaide over the last few years, the right-sided centre-back. They've tried a variety of different partners for him, so I think that's probably going to be a big one that we'll have to have a look at. But we'll jump across to the players in. Let's see if there's anyone in there that looks like a natural replacement for some of those guys that we've mentioned. They've brought in Johnny Yole and Alexander Popovich, who've both been highlighted from scholarship contracts this season, previous youth development players that have come through at Adelaide United. Add Nesta Iran Kunda to that list as well, albeit having made a jump across from an NPL side. They brought in ex-Melbourne Victory defender Nick Ansell, who briefly had a stint over in Korea, as well as some time in Portugal as well, before returning to the Victory last year. George Blackwood returns after playing under Harry Kewell at Oldham Athletic and not doing too badly. Not a player that, has set the league a lot in his time at Sydney FC and Adelaide United, but always a player that's really well respected by his coaches. But he returns to the league itself. Isaiah Sanchez returns at 34 years of age to lead the line again. He was, of course, their captain the season they won the league. And then, really adds to that kind of Spanish quartet and contingent that they've had consistently within their best side. So not one-to-one in terms of the players out to the players back in, but definitely some correlation. The likes of Nick Ansell, you'd think, is a replacement for Jordan Elsey. George Blackwood maybe is a replacement for a Tommy Urich or an Al Hassan Toure, and Sanchez really coming in midfield is a fascinating one. But who stands as the biggest name there that they've brought in this season, and who do you think will have the biggest impact on their lineup?
I think Isaias. I think maybe not so much on the field, but I think the leadership that he brings, and also off the field in terms of not a morale boost, but being like such a cult icon for Adelaide, sort of like, we spoke about Diego Castro last week and the importance that he had to Perth. Every team's got one. Matt Simon with Central Coast Mariners at the moment is another great example of just a player who's sort of synonymous with a club. And I think Isaias is that kind of player for Adelaide United. So he's 34, a little bit older. Is he going to be able to produce or replicate the success that he had with his first stint with Adelaide United? Not too sure, but I think in terms of leadership and then that sort of off-the-field morale boost for fans, I think he's going to have a pretty big impact. It's a bit of a homecoming, so to say.
Yeah, and they've done that really well throughout their history. So guys like Casio, Marcelo Carusca, Marcos Flores, a whole bunch of ex-players that they've brought in as internationals have loved Adelaide, stayed around Adelaide, and become involved in either the club academy structures, the NPL setup, all that sort of stuff. So I think he's almost another name to add to that list. Like maybe his family loves being here, maybe he just loves it as a city, and it's where he sees his long-term future. I wouldn't imagine he's got as many years left in him, but he is kind of like a languid, deep-lying playmaker anyway. He doesn't need a whole lot of like prime fitness. The fascinating part with his signing is that they're going to have Sanchez and Wande, as well as Stefan Mork, Joe Coletti, Louis Dorigo, a bunch of other young midfield prospects coming through. It's going to be very difficult, I think, for them to try and fit all those players into a lineup, particularly when you think they used Moture at certain points last year as a number 10 player, and you can use George Blackwood there, and you can use players like Craig Goodwin and I've nearly forgotten his name, Ben Halloran, in that role as well. So they're quite stacked in midfield and in their forward line. They've got some great wingers as well. But I don't know if they've addressed all the issues they had last season defensively. And I think Ryan Strain at right back is potentially the biggest name that they haven't replaced yet. So unless they've got someone coming through that they're deliberately thinking is going to take that role, like a Harvey Lopez or a Josh Cavallo that's already at the club, that will be very interesting to see. But to me, it still looks as like an incomplete squad list. I think they need like a proper number 10 or a proper star player that is going to, sometimes drag them through games to really support the creative load that falls on Craig Goodwin a lot of the time. That's going to really be the right complementary player for players like Isaias Wande, Louis Dorigo, even Stefan Mork, who's still their captain. Like, I don't know if their captain's going to get in their starting 11 in their best available lineup. So there's still a little bit of work to do there, but I've got faith that they know what they're doing at Adelaide. They usually have pretty consistent planning. I did mention coaches and captains, Carl Vart, Stefan Mork heading into the season. Again, be interesting to see if Isaias maybe starts applying some pressure to get his captain's armband back. He was the captain when he left the club. He has, of course, come back as well. But what areas for improvement do you think Adelaide will be looking at this season? We spoke about some of their highlights and frustrations. Where do you think they're going to look to try and improve and really make that jump towards a top 4, potentially top 2 side this season?
Well, consistency is going to be the key there. I think, we talked about some of their runs of form, some of their patches there, and it was just all over the shop. So I think that will be obviously the key to success, being able to limit bad runs of form and being able to get the most out of games when you're not necessarily playing that well, and turning some of those draws into wins to maximize points. So obviously I think that's going to be a big one. But you also had an interesting one that sort of linked in with the Al Hassan Toure departure. What's that?
Yeah, I think they need to have a better long-term strategy about turning youth into starting 11s. And some of this will come into, and I hate to bring it up because I do it every week, but like if you've got Football Manager and you get a good youth intake, you've got to plan like 2 and 3 years in ahead to integrate them into the team. So if we go through their players out, Dominic Costanzo.
A lot of youth.
A lot of youth, like Nyongabiri, Smith, Abatu, Okuntam. You don't, and Al Hassan Toure, who we've already mentioned quite in depth, but you don't just play a player because they're youth. You play them because they're good enough for that level of football and because you believe that they're going to get to that stage. And I think that's the challenge, is finding that balance of saying we're not going to play South Australian youngsters for the sake of it. We're going to play South Australian youngsters because they are ready for A-League football, and that's going to grow their development. And this is a player that we're going to lock in and have as part of our key lineup for the next 4 or 5 seasons. And I think that's where they fell down a little bit last year. I think they had certain players in certain positions that they wanted to build around. I think Louis Dorigo's one. I think at the start of the season, Noah Smith was as well. But it hasn't worked out. They've had to move on to other clubs. Smith has made the jump to the Mariners to try and get game time at left back. Nyongabiri has made the jump to Perth to try and complement their existing lineup. And they're really strong. They've got players like Craig Goodwin, Ben Halloran, who are amongst the best wingers in the league. They've got behind them guys like Ryan Kiddo, Yaya Dukali, Mo Toure. Like, there's heaps of depth in those positions, which is going to be a real challenge for them to try and manage over the next few years. And if they can do that, if they can find a way to get that consistency and start developing players for specific positions and roles in an ongoing shape and format, 4 years in advance, 5 years in advance, if they know next season that they've got a couple of 18, 19-year-old players coming through that they really think could make the grade in an A-League level, I think they need to start planning and developing that further ahead. To me, someone like Sanchez coming back in at 34 in a marquee and visa spot means that they haven't necessarily planned and prepared that well for that particular position, and maybe their development and their youth academy and their much vaunted South Australian first policy isn't producing sort of players in that position to the A-League calibre that we want them to be. So, yeah, I think that's where they want to try and improve. I think they need to have more of a longer-term strategy, and if they're going to be a development club, just commit to being a development club and play those players throughout the course of a year and get them the game time, because that's really the biggest pro and plus point that I think Adelaide has done really well in the league, and that clubs like Brisbane and the Mariners and whoever else are trying to copy going into this season. But we have kind of been quite praising of Adelaide in a variety of aspects. If you were going to make a membership pitch and put your marketing hat on, Brand, what would you be putting out there to Adelaide fans who maybe haven't gotten a membership yet, or maybe haven't been to Coopers for a couple of seasons because of lockdowns, whatever else? What would you be saying to try and get them in the stands round one?
So first of all, similar to the Mariners, Coopers is a great place to go watch a game of football. As you said, when it's full, the atmosphere is pumping. What is it? The Red Army, they're normally up and about as well. They're good value for money as well. It's a great place to go watch football. So if you go there, of course, you're going to have a good time. The other thing as well is, we spoke about some of Adelaide's branding. They are uniquely South Australian, uniquely, what is it, Adelaidean? Is that the word? I don't know. Never used that before.
Every word had to be said at one point the first time, and you might have just come up with Adelaidean. I don't know what they'd prefer. They Crow Eaters, they used to get called back in the day. I don't think they love that though. But
I don't think that's the official terminology. But anyway. We spoke about some of the designs that they've been able to incorporate into their kits, into their releases, into their promos. Some of the stuff, as you said, with the South Australia First policy with their recruitment. If you're from Adelaide, if you're from South Australia, it's a club that's built around Adelaide and South Australia. I know that sounds like a gimme, but you look at Western United and even Melbourne City, not necessarily synonymous with the city of Melbourne. They've struggled to sort of create that link there, whereas I think Adelaide United do that very well. So that would be my pitch.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd agree with that it is one of the best places in the league to watch football. There are few grounds that create that sort of atmosphere. The Red Army supporters group are always fantastic and open to any new members that want to get involved. So, yeah, just give them a chance. There's also this great, I think it's Australia National Decking or something like that. They've got this corner area with the little bar set up. There is a competition out at the moment where Australian Outdoor Living, that's it. There is a competition at the moment, Branson, that I've entered 2 or 3 times to try and win 15 tickets in that area for a game against Melbourne Victory later this season. So people should keep an eye out on that one because they always do great fan engagement, things like that. But Brown, I might be dragging you to Adelaide at some point in December to watch a couple of A-League games while we're in town.
Groovy, let's go.
Their expectations and our prediction, we'll come back on that in a moment because I think we'll talk through it with the PR rankings. But their round 1 fixture is versus Perth Glory. It is the Saturday night, November 20th. We have just, at time of recording and time of release, gotten under a month to the A-League season starting. The longest off-season in the world is quickly progressing very fast. But jumping into the PR rankings, at the moment we've got Melbourne City on top, Sydney FC second, Brisbane Roar third, and Central Coast Mariners fourth. The Adelaide squad that we've spoken about, how they performed last year, where do you think, Brand, that they're going to be aiming for, and where do you think is realistic in terms of how they sit up against these teams?
I think they've got to be aiming for finals. I mean, they made it last year, so obviously they would expect to be making it again. Again, they've got a pretty young playing group, pretty young core, so they'll be hoping that they can build on top of that. So I think finals has to be the goal for them. Whether or not they'll get there, I'm not so sure. As far as the power rankings go, I have them ahead of Central Coast. I think the Mariners are just going to fall off a cliff. I mean, I hope they don't, but I think that could happen. So for me, Adelaide, I think they're above the Mariners. Despite beating Brisbane in the finals last year, though, I don't think they're ahead of them. What do you think?
I would agree, and I base that on off-season recruitment and the fact that I still think they've got a couple of spots in their squad that they need to improve. I don't think Adelaide have... we've just accidentally lost their logo, so I'll get that back up here in a second. I don't think Adelaide have a star of the league, if that makes sense. I think the best Adelaide teams of the past have had a proper number 10 player that they've built around and made a key element of that squad. And I think that's really what they're lacking. They tried to do it with Stefan Mork last season. They tried to do it with one of the Toures partnering Tommy Urich as a deeper lying player. They've got great players in terms of Craig Goodwin, in terms of Ben Halloran. I rate those two in the top echelon of A-League wingers. But they haven't really got that player that's able to unlock defenses and find the right passes to get them in. And when they have that, they're usually pretty fantastic. So I would put them just behind Brisbane, but not far behind. And I think both Brisbane and Adelaide would be planning their season trying to reel in teams like Sydney FC and Melbourne City. So, yeah, a good team. I'd expect them to be challenging for top 6, but I think there's one or two more players that they've got to add in. So I'm happy to back up your ranking and put them in that 4th spot.
Fantastic, mate. That pretty much, though, wraps up our season preview for Adelaide United. We've spoken a lot about Adelaide United on this podcast for a variety of reasons. That's it. Adelaide United chat done. We're moving on. We're not going to mention them again. Maybe not. We might. Who knows? We're going to try not to. But, mate, before we get into our next season preview, we are going to jump into the French Island Hall of Fame. Probably your absolute favourite segment. Mine is anything to do with kids. But you put a poll up. Shout out to you for putting the poll up at like 2 a.m. or whatever. You've been scheduling out some of your tweets. I think last week it went out at midnight. This time you went, do you know what, midnight? That's not great for traction. I know, 3 a.m. That'll do it. Is that what time it went up?
It is, because now this is back end. This is like kind of inside baseball type of stuff. But people might love it. Someone like Sog, who's over at A-League Couch Critics, might understand the frustration that I'm feeling. We've been trying to use TweetDeck to schedule our tweets consistently so that like they're going out at regular times to get that engagement and all that sort of stuff. You can't schedule a poll. So if you're trying to do a poll tweet, you actually have to manually go in at the time that you want to do it. And I keep forgetting that it's like, I keep setting all our tweets up at the start of a week for everything that's happening. And we do a couple of like reaction tweets throughout the course of the week. You were sharing that phenomenal Plymouth Argyle goal, which potentially should be in a Hall of Fame section of its own. But I can't schedule that poll tweet. So the last 2 weeks in a row, I've forgotten about it and thought, oh shit, I forgot to put the poll up. And that is why it has been appearing at midnight and 3 a.m. But next week, maybe I give the responsibility to you, Branson, and you can try and remember to do it at midday. But we'll try.
I'll do my best. I can't do much worse, can I?
You can't do much worse, no. And it is, I think, limiting like the amount of people that we're getting voting on it as well, because it's like a mad rush for me to try and actually get it done and out there for people to vote before we actually start recording the podcast, which, you know, like it is what it is. Have you seen the result yet? Is this going to be news to you? Or
I've checked the result. I've pulled it up on my phone, but tell the listeners, mate. What is it?
Okay, we'll jump into that screen now for our audio-only listeners. After a mammoth 6 votes cast, I can only assume I'm one and Bran is one as well. So thank you to the 4 people that voted. It is a dead heat. 50% of the draw going to Brand's nomination from last week, Mariners nesting Osprey, and my 50% going to Simon freaking Hill. I know certain people, and I'm definitely looking at Samuel Ogg here, that was like 100% just voting against me to see what I pull out this week.
Right.
I think in scenarios like this, we have to go with who won the week prior. So I have a feeling we're going to put in...
I'm just putting both in. Why not put them both in?
Because that's like going to... I'm coming back on Simon Hill, and I'm going to pick... Like, Simon Hill's now going to be my one. He needs to go in on his own. Like, it is so disrespectful. He's the one who got away. Yeah, it's so disrespectful that he has, 1, lost to the Osprey, and then 2, that we can't even give him his own, like, induction week. He deserves a week of his own to actually, like, you know, go in with authority, with the pomp and circumstance. We'll tag him in it. We'll see if we can get him to do, like, an acceptance speech or something like that. Soccer Twitter is fantastic. I love it all, but like, you guys have 100% screwed me over this week, and I will not forget it. So,
well, 4 people have. So
yeah,
in goes the Osprey.
I know
what
one of
their
them.
Names again? I'm going to look them up.
You look them up, but the Osprey, of course, which originally came to the forefront because it nested originally in the stand itself and presented a whole end of a stadium being filled one particular game because it's an endangered species. They didn't want to move it, but there are now a male and female breeding pair. They've had something like 5 chicks in this light stand, so the lights can't be turned on beyond like 10 p.m. or something like that in the Central Coast because they disturb the animals and their nest and where it's based now. So they go in, and you've gone back to back now, Branson. You take a 2-0 lead in terms of overall inductees. You are the man of the people.
My good friends Rosie and Hutch, the Ospreys, Rosie and Hutch. That's them up there on their line poll. Fantastic, they're in. All right, nominations this week, mate. Who are you going for?
I think I'm going to set some parameters, right? You're going to go first because you are now 2 times in a row reigning defending champion. But given that this is our Magic of the Cup episode and we spent so much time talking about the FFA Cup, have you got anything specifically relating to the FFA Cup that you want to nominate?
Yeah, I do, mate. I'm going to go. I'm going to stick with, what is it?
Avery? Avian theme?
Avery? Yep, avian, is that it?
I think so. We'll just pretend it is.
We'll go with it. Yeah, I'm going to stick with the bird-related theme. The Melbourne Knights, Croat duck. It was, funnily enough, far out. We said we weren't going to mention Adelaide United again. It was a Melbourne Knights clash against Adelaide United that Croat duck featured at, and it was very cool. It was a great night out at Knight Stadium. Big crowd, big attendance of all the things to see there. A duck wasn't high on my list. I didn't think Croat duck was going to be there, but shame on me. He was, I believe he was wearing a Knights hat.
A little Knights jersey and a little Croatian hat. Yeah. So I think the duck's name is Crowcap or Crowcup or something like that.
I thought it was or Croat duck. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Anyway, that's my nomination.
Yeah, it is not the only duck. Apparently, this guy brings a duck to all the Melbourne Knights NPL games, which is fantastic. And this is like the 7th version of that duck. Crow-Patak. Thank you. I knew it was something along those lines, which I think means like Croatian duck when it's translated or whatever else. It's not the most thoughtful name. It's very literal.
For the record, Crow-Patak is, or at the time, was a 7-year-old waterfowl.
Okay, apologies to ducks that might be listening in who've somehow gotten onto Spotify or YouTube. But great episode, or great historic moment, I think, in the FFA Cup history, of course, getting a duck rocking up to a game in a kit, and it got let in because that's the magic of the NPL and the magic of the Cup. I'm going to stick with the avian theme as well. And I'm also going to stick with the FFA Cup theme, but we're going to have 2 avian adversaries go head-to-head. I'm going to nominate the FFA Cup Seagull that got knocked out in the Melbourne City versus Sydney FC final in 2017. I think Danny Vukovic took out with a match ball, and it was unconscious for a moment, and then one of the stewards on the sideline actually kind of nursed it back to health. So I don't know if people remember that one. It might be a bit of a throwback, but when I do the 3 a.m. poll this week, I will also put up photos of Crow-Patak, and I will also put up photos of the FFA Cup Seagull, and we will find out once and for all which avian FFA Cup mascot goes into the Hall of Fame and becomes the primary bird and the primary wing species that we've dropped in that competition. I'm still livid about. I'm going to be so mad about this Simon Hill thing for the next 3 weeks, so I have to get one back. I can't go 3-0 down, Branson.
Well, no, you won't. But nice try. You can't beat Crow-Patak. No, I think he's 9 years old. Sorry, 9 years old now, the waterfowl. So anyway, mate, we're going to move on. We're going to go from birds to bulls because what a great segue. Our next segment is going to be the Macarthur FC season preview. Taking a look at them, it was, of course, their inaugural season in the competition last year. Mixed bag from Macarthur. Some good, some bad, some ugly. Bit of everything in there. Tell me about Macarthur. What did you make of their first season in the league? Do you think they held their own? Good edition, bad edition? And, how would you compare them to Western United? Because I think that's obviously the closest comparison coming in 1 year after. Unpack that one.
Yeah, you've asked about 7 questions. I'll start with the easy one. Look, I think this is a tough one. I'd say they think finals was the pass mark that they needed. It's always tough for a new club coming into a league if you're not immediately successful, for the local group to get around you. And they are competing not just with Sydney FC, but Western Sydney, who both have pretty active, pretty vocal fan bases in that area and in that corridor. I think the fact that they came in with already infrastructure there, clearly... What's a good way of saying this? Clearly they have a long-term vision, right? And they're committed to a manager that's going to play in a particular style. They are committed to developing grassroots and community links within the Macarthur area. They have, of course, weirdly set up this relationship with Northbridge to get exposure in the NPL competition immediately. That they're in it for the long haul, and I think that's what they've set up quite early. Is that they've tried to get their infrastructure pieces in place as early as possible. I think at certain points in off-season last year, and I'm not calling him out on this, but I think like Mark Bosnich and a couple of other pundits expected Macarthur to win the whole thing, which I do think was perhaps a little bit misguided because they've got... Ante Milic is a great coach, but it's very hard when you're playing against teams that have had 2 or 3 seasons with groups playing together to then immediately come in with a brand new group and expect them to operate at that exact same level and that exact same tier. Sorry, Brandon, I think you were going to add something there as well.
Yeah, no, all I was going to say was kind of can't blame them. I do agree that it might have been slightly misguided, but their lineup on paper last season was spectacular, in particularly before their first game. When you look at some of the players they had in, Franjic, Federici, Milligan, Susaeta, Extravaria, some of the players that they were able to bring in, you took notice. You're like, all right, okay, this is an impactful squad. On paper, it was right up there with the best. So I definitely agree that, playing games and having that sort of relationship with, your teammates, and more than that, like the trainers, the coaching staff, the front office, everything that goes around, that goes on at a club obviously has a big impact. But yeah, anyway, go on.
Yeah, and then I think some of the players that they brought in that you mentioned, some of those big names, like they weren't necessarily suited to the style of the coach, Ante Milicic. You said a little bit ugly in periods. I don't think their plan A, when it's working, is a great brand of football. It's super possession based, it's super possession heavy. I think he would look at having 60% possession is effectively as good as being a goal up. Like, that's just the way that they set themselves up. They've got a very deep midfield base. They've got a very deep defensive line. They're very much like a transition team that was designed to try and get the ball to the likes of Derbyshire and Susueta in 1v1 situations as early as possible. It wasn't a coincidence, I think, that their best football came once they introduced Charles Mombois, who provided them a little bit more run from midfield and a little bit more, I guess, support to their forward line moving forward from that number 10 position. And he's obviously a great story coming through the NPL academy structure as well. Their off-season recruitment this year has absolutely fascinated me when you kind of compare what they did last year, which you mentioned. A lot of people were saying that their recruitment was super aggressive, to what they've done this year, which is effectively take the same route and avenue, but try and do that with proven talent within the league itself, where a lot of those players have played and been successful at other A-League clubs. So maybe they looked at it as, it's not that Extraberia, Susueta, Matt Derbyshire weren't great players, but they weren't proven quantities in the league. So maybe they're looking at it that way. I think they also had players like Mark Milligan, who clearly wanted to play in midfield, who probably should have been playing at centre-back for them. But they've still got a good core group together. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for them again this season. I think making finals last year has now set the stage that they expect to go and become a top 4 team and consistently compete at that level. But having said that, pretty much every club that we've spoken about so far, Brian, is expecting to try and get into that top 6, and someone has to miss out. So what do you think their results from last year? Of course, finishing 6th in the league itself. Again, some up, some down. They never really belted a team. I think they beat Adelaide 4-0 at some point last season, with Derbyshire getting a hat-trick, but that was most of their other wins were by single goal margins because of the way they set up. They did beat Central Coast Mariners 2-0 in the elimination final in Gosford at Mariners Stadium. We spoke about in the Mariners preview how kind of listless or directionless the Mariners' performance was at certain points, and Macarthur, to their credit, are one of the best teams at setting up to defend a lead. And then they lost to City in the semi-finals at, was it Kogarah? Is that where we were? Brand and I were there, just running the muck, of course.
That, yeah.
And, I think that was a pretty limp performance as well, 2-0 defeat on the day. Based on that, what do you think their season highlight was from last season, and where do you think they're going to really look to try and improve upon further as being their biggest opportunity, their biggest strength that they're looking to develop and cultivate further in season 2?
Well, I think their season highlight has to be that win over the Mariners. Monumental across the board for a number of reasons. Firstly, I think the Mariners beat them all 3 times they played during the regular season. So having lost 3 times, it clearly seemed like the Mariners had Macarthur's number. There was just something about the way that the Mariners set up that just obviously caused Macarthur problems. They were able to hit him on the counter-attack. So to go up against a team who you've had a terrible track record against and to beat him, I think that was very good. In that game as well, I think it was James Meredith was sent off in the 70th minute, sort of midway through that second half. It was 0-0 at full time, and mate, we were watching the game and it just seemed like it was primed for the Mariners to just run over the top of them. You're like, they've got home field advantage, they've got a sellout crowd here. The Bulls are down to 10, and Macarthur won 2-0. They scored twice in extra time, and don't want to say they stole the game, but it was a bit of it was just, given all the stuff that they had to go up against within that 120 minutes and, the previous matchups, I thought that was just a huge, huge result. And it's the kind of thing that can invigorate a fan base. And, you said it's important for teams to have success. They didn't just make the finals, they won a final, and it was a big win.
Yeah, I'd compare them to their initial season had very similar parallels to Western Sydney's, where it was definitely built on defensive success. Once Macarthur had a lead, they were very, very difficult to break down. And some of that is because their defensive partnership, which was mostly Sushnar and Jovanovic last season, they're both bloody huge, and they both just sit on the edge of the kind of penalty spot at the moment. James Meredith is fantastic. Even Franich, who they had last season, a couple other players that filled in the fullback spots as well. Like it was a tough defensive line to break down, and then they usually had Extraberria and Milligan sat in front of that defense like 5 yards further forward. So they definitely build around defense and they build around possession quite a bit. The big improvement for them, or like that would be their season highlight on the pitch, how difficult they were to beat, and they really were difficult to beat at various points. A lot of their like missed points were the result of draws rather than actual wins because they didn't get the goal that they felt they would have needed. Similarly, they did have a couple of off-field issues, which they are obviously going to try and address. What do you think their greatest frustration was, and what were some of the off-field issues that you've kind of noted in the run sheet here that you want to discuss further?
Well, I think those off-field issues are the biggest frustration. And, like obviously coming into the league, you need to make an impact. It's going to be difficult in the city market, because a lot of existing football fans probably already go for Sydney, already go for Western Sydney, similar to Western United. They've got they're the third ones at the table here. So limited, range, not range, but a limited market to try to capture. And I don't think they did a good job of doing that. I think the fans that they did get, they sort of pissed off. There was stuff with membership prices were super expensive. Their interactions with their active support were terrible across the board. I think it was something like, their active area memberships, something like $400. It was ridiculous. The seats behind the goals as well, while, good for an active area, generally speaking, the cheapest seats and the worst in terms of like pure viewing perspective. So the fact that they were almost pricing out their most passionate fans, I think was, a very bad look, in particularly when football prides itself on that atmosphere. So if you haven't got an active area, if you haven't got that sort of atmosphere, that's what sort of attracts people. So I think that was a very bad look as well. And then the bullpen as well, getting disbanded, and then it was, I can't even remember now, it was disbanded, then it was brought back by the club itself. The club itself took over, something like that. Then you had the original bullpen, then you've got the official bullpen or whatever. It was just a mess. So I think, it made it difficult to be a fan. It made it difficult to be an active member of the club. It was just disorganized. So I think they've really sort of mucked that up with pricing out members, and then the active area. I don't even know what happened there anymore.
Yeah, I kind of remember it a little bit, and I could be wrong. So by all means, correct us in the comment section or over on Twitter if I've gotten any of this wrong. There was a guy who kind of coined the bullpen phrase that he was going to start off the active support from the off, and then he started to have some very, let's say, not on brand views and opinions on Twitter and social media, and really started to dictate some not great club ideologies as to what he wanted the fan support to be. So the club actually took responsibility for the bullpen, and that's where the original bullpen Twitter account came from. It is that original guy who's got some issues that potentially he needs to work through a little bit, because the club didn't really want to have, I think, a large section of their active support alienated and not able to be a part of it based on the beliefs of one person. So again, I could be wrong with all that. My memory maybe has gone out the window a little bit, but I kind of get why the club did it in their defense. You don't want to have, especially as a young club, any fan or any potential fan feeling alienated from the ability to go and support the team. The bullpen itself, its placement along the side of the pitch in the corner is horrific. That is one of the dumbest decisions ever, and the club deserves 100% of the blame.
They moved it as well.
Yeah, they moved it twice. So their active support is the only club it's the only support in the league that doesn't sit behind a goal. So there is no home end at Campbell Field or Campbelltown Stadium. That kills them quite a bit as well. When we spoke about the A-League advertisement campaign, really trying to highlight the most of the best thing that we have, which is the fan support, the fan engagement, the colours, the setting, the match day experience. That's just not it. They really took that away from themselves and shot themselves in the foot with it, which is a challenge. The membership pricing, it does happen. They spend a lot of money as a startup club. They paid a ton of money for their A-League license. If you remember back, Lang Walker, the big conglomerate, actually secured the license and then sold it off to local businesses who didn't have the same budget requirements or budget capacity to then run the club. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of different off-field things that I think could have been done better. I think their social media presence needs a ton of work as well. That's probably one of the big frustrations for their fans, is that you can hear more from the original bullpen guy than you can the actual club's account itself, which is crazy. But on the field, as we said, they did pretty well. I just think, and this is perhaps part of a bigger holistic discussion, if you're a new club in a league and you're trying to capture hearts and minds in an area that already has teams like Sydney FC, like Greater Western Sydney, you really need to have a attractive style of play, and I don't think Macarthur did. I think they were defensively sound, defensively solid, but they were really trying to, I think, compete in a different way, which is playing an attractive, expansive brand of football that fans want to get excited about and that fans want to go to watch. I don't think you're going to get many people wanting to go and sit in an active support end, not behind a goal, who's going to see like a 1-0 victory, basically. A scrappy 1-0 win with not a lot of chances and a ton of possession and a really deep defensive block. And I think that becomes a challenge. Do you have to be an attractive style of play as a new club to capture hearts and minds, or do you just have to be successful? If it is, you just have to be successful and they go on to win a league or a premiership or whatever else, then, like my point doesn't stand. But if they stick in this like kind of top 6 but not really top 2 scenario for much longer, they're going to have a look about the style of football they play and what they're really adding to the league itself. But players out, let's fire through that first because there's quite a few names here and some big names as well. Denny Jonru, who had a fantastic campaign for them last season, really kind of broke into that first team, was one of their best players last year, and also had a fantastic Olympic campaign with the Olyroos. He made the jump over to Toulouse in Div 2 in France, or Ligue 2 if you want to get sticky with the pronunciations. Matt Derbyshire returns to Cyprus after a pretty decent stint last year. Most of his goals were from the penalty spot or set-piece scenarios, but proved himself as being a very capable player in the league itself. Markel Susueta has retired at the age of 33, the ex-Spanish international. Mark Milligan, who we already mentioned in our 10 commentary team, has also retired at 36 and makes his way into that media role. And then Benat Echeverria, who we spoke about last season as potentially being the best player in the league without kicking a ball, has also retired, the other Spaniard that they had in their squad. Ivan Franjic, long-time A-League player with Brisbane and Melbourne City and Perth, and I'm sure a bunch of other clubs that I've forgotten because he was around a bit. He's made the jump back to Heidelberg United in the Victorian NPL. Loic Puyo, a French midfielder, has returned to France and is still to sign with the club. And then youngsters Walter Scott, Yanni Nikolaou, Miloslav Popovic and Kyle Chimenti have all been released, heading back into NPL programs and clubs. Of those names, those players out, Brian, who do you think looms largest as the player that they need to replace the most?
Well, I'm going to name 2. I think Denny Jonro is obviously a big loss. He was great at Melbourne City, obviously left to get more playing time, to get an actual starting gig, and he really thrived with Macarthur. He was able to take that next step. Obviously looked very good, looked good for the Olyroos. He's gone over to France now, so you can't fault the club for losing him, but clearly he's going to be a big player that they're going to have to try to replace. Matt Derbyshire as well. He was their leading goal scorer. The stats that I have, I'm going to contradict you here. I think he only scored 1 penalty last year, according to the stats. So he scored, apparently to what I'm looking at, he had 14 goals and 13 of them were from open play. So he was second in the Golden Boot. So he's going to be a key player to try to replace. But, overall, some of those outs are huge. Those are some big outs. So I mean, high quality players, big names. It's going to be tough to fill, but I think they've actually done a pretty darn good job.
Yeah, I'll stand corrected. In my head, I thought he was like a set piece threat, like he was good from corners and throws and free kicks and that sort of stuff, getting on the end of him. But yeah, apparently, I'll agree with you, Brand. He's a terrible penalty taker, and he needs to do better in Cyprus this season. But then moving to the players in, now they have lost. You did put a bunch of different ages alongside. Do you want to talk about that now, or do you want to talk about that with the players in?
Well, I'll talk about it now because it sort of leads into it. So a lot of the players that they've lost were quite old. Almost all of them were over the age of 30. So I think one of the, apart from Genre and the youngsters that you mentioned, but I think one of the big things that they've been able to do with their strategy for recruitment this year is they've replaced them with younger guys. So rather than going for guys like Milligan and Franjic and Echeverria and Susaeta, who just have, 1 year to offer the club, 1 year then retirement, 1 and they're done. At least what they've been able to do, while they're still veterans, most of them are around 30, that 30 mark, they've still got a couple of seasons left in the tanks. So I think that's going to be good for Macarthur in terms of continuity, because this year they're obviously going to have quite a high squad turnover. So these players that they've been able to bring in, being a little bit younger, I think is going to be good because they're going to be able to get, not just one and done years out of them, maybe 2 or even 3 years. And I think that'll serve them better in the long run.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the older players that you mentioned, Derbyshire, Susueta, Milligan, Extraberry, yes, they're all 34, 35, 36. But the players they've brought in are all kind of like 30, turning 31, or Jordan Much is actually turning 30 in December. The only player they've signed under the age of 30 this league season is Danny De Silva. But we'll run through the list. So Ulysses De Villa, reigning Johnny Warren medalist, joins from Wellington Phoenix. Danny De Silva joins from Central Coast Mariners, a player that has promised much in terms of potential and hasn't quite found the home to kind of really get the best out of him. Tommy Urich, that we've already mentioned, comes across from Adelaide United. Craig Noon, leading assist maker in the league last season. Second in the assist totals behind Diamante last season, joins from Melbourne City. Tommy Uskok makes the jump over from Western United, and Jordan Much, the English central midfielder with Premier League experience, makes the jumps across from Western Sydney Wanderers. Some fascinating signings in that group. Some very, very interesting ones. Which one are you the most excited about?
Ulysses De Villa. I think that's going to be the biggest signing. You know, reigning Johnny Warren medalist, one of the standout players last year, if not the. I think he's been fantastic for the Wellington Phoenix. I think they're going to feel his loss massively, but we'll talk about that in a future episode. I think he's great. I think he's fantastic. They've got a couple of assist machines there, and him and Craig Noon as well. So maybe that's one way to replace Matt Derbyshire, where it's like if you haven't necessarily got someone who's going to score 15 goals a season, which Tommy Urich is not, then have people who can dish it up on a plate for him. So I think their strategy this year was just sort of poach one of the biggest players from each club, because of those 6 names there, all of them are from a different club. I think Adelaide United, they signed Al Hassan Toure as well. So that's the only club who they've taken 2 players from. But most of those players are straight out of the starting 11 from pretty much every other club there. So some interesting moves. And while they are around 30, they are by no means youngsters, apart from De Silva. I do think that they've been able to pick up some guys who are going to be able to contribute at a pretty decent level for a sustained period of time.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because they are, as you've said, they're all very good players. They're all players that would start in most A-League squads. But I think what's interesting about it is it perhaps signals a change of intent. So De Villa, at various points last season for Wellington, played up front. He played on the wing. He didn't play as a traditional number 10 because of the way that they set up, but that would be his preferred position, is to play as that kind of like central attacking midfielder. De Silva probably wants to play that position as well, but more often gets used as on the left-hand side of the midfield. Craig Noon was excellent cutting in from the right-hand side for Melbourne City last season. He was a key part of their offensive lineup as they kind of swept through the teams and put some big goal tallies on the board. Tommy Urich is the fascinating one to me there, because I think if you've got those 3 players playing behind someone, they really need someone who's going to stretch defences and make runs in behind and do whatever else, where what we saw from Urich last season is that he's not what he was at 22, 23 when he was in that Asian Cup team in 2015. He's more of a target man hold-up player now, and I don't know where the run comes from, because Craig Noon is very much an assist guy. He's not like a active scorer. I think he got 4 or 5 goals last season, but his main role is to look for good crosses into the box and try and get the ball into good areas. Same with De Villa. He's mainly an assist machine. De Silva, mainly an assist machine. So are they all going to be trying to feed Tommy Urich, or is there going to be like a different setup or a different structure to what we've seen previously for them? The big one for me is that they've lost 3 of their best midfield playmakers in Susueta, Milligan and Extraberria, and Denny Genre as well, but the replacements, Tomislav Uskok potentially, who can play as a centre-back and can anchor a midfield, and Jordan Much aren't really famed for that. I don't know. I quite like Tommy Uskok. I think he's a good player when he's playing in a back line because he can pass a bit and he's a big, like, kind of lanky defender that can get his foot onto stuff frustratingly. But I don't know if Western Sydney fans are that upset that Jordan Much has departed. I don't think there was that much that we really saw for him last season that would make me think he's on the same tier or is going to really dictate play from the base of midfield. So that will be a very interesting one to see.
Change of scenery could do him well, though. You know, Western Sydney maybe just wasn't his spot, you know, his system. So that'll be interesting as well. Just a quick one on Tommy Urich as well. At no stage in his career, regardless of whatever club he's got, whatever club he's been at, has he scored double-digit goals in a season. He's never done that before. So if you look at Macarthur, is he going to be their main goal scorer? If so, yeah, I mean, he's not going to score double digits. He hasn't yet. He might, but he hasn't.
Yeah, I think, and that's the fascinating part. Like I spoke about, they were very good defensively last year, and I think Milicic has them set up well defensively and well to keep possession as much as possible. But have they solved the conundrum last year, which is that they've brought in a lot of creators, but have they got that high quality finisher that perhaps they want? Maybe they were originally going after like a Tomer Hamed, or other players in and around the division that we know can finish and get 12 to 15 goals in a league season. I think that's what they're lacking. I don't know if Tommy Juric is that. Maybe Alhassan Toure will become that eventually, but that for me is the big question mark. Where are they going to get those goals? Because as a team that doesn't create a ton of chances, they really need to have someone in that side like a Derbyshire that's going to take as many of them as possible and make sure that they get that 10 to 15 goal striker that every team that finishes in the top six really needs. But coaches, we've already mentioned Ante Milicic had a pretty decent run at the end of his career with Newcastle Jets and a few other sides in the A-League itself. Obviously made the transition to coaching. His role prior to taking over at Macarthur was with the Matildas, where he did a pretty decent job as well. And the captain, Adam Federici, for me, the best goalkeeper in the division at the moment. I think he's absolutely fantastic and criminally underrated last season. But areas for improvement. We've spoken about their highlights, their frustrations, what they're trying to do in terms of their recruitment. Where do you think they'll be looking to improve most this coming season?
I think they'll just be looking to improve their footprint. This is off the field. Improve their footprints within the community. We've seen Western United, struggle with that in Melbourne. They had their first year, and they were very similar. First year, made the finals, won a final, and then lost to Melbourne City in the semi. Macarthur did exactly the same thing. First year, made the finals, won a final, lost to Melbourne City in the semis. So very similar there, but Western United have really sort of stalled from there. They've struggled to, build on crowds. They've struggled to build on that initial success, and they're kind of petering. They're just sort of treading water a little bit. I think Macarthur, off the field, they'll be wanting to build. They had some, stuff off the field where if they had their time again, they'd probably redo. And now's their chance to redo it. They have that time again now heading into their second season. So they really want to make sure that they're able to grow, because this squad that they've got, the squad that they had last year was fantastic. This squad, I think, has the potential to be even better, to be honest. And you want to get fans on board. As you said, people want to get around a successful football club. They're going to be successful at the moment, you would think. So I think they need to really try to make their impact and get as many fans through the gate now to help sustain long-term success off the field.
Yeah, and I think they need to maybe get on board with the idea that they might have to have a less financially competitive membership package to get people in the door so that they can get like 5,000 at each of their games. If they can get 5K as an average attendance this season, they do hold the record. But they and Western United is having the lowest crowd attendances in their original seasons, which isn't great when you consider like North Queensland Fury and Melbourne Heart in the early days and all that sort of stuff. Like the two of those clubs really need to start getting fans through the door. That's a big challenge for them, and hopefully they'll improve it. Speaking of membership pitch, Branson, I asked you to do it earlier for Adelaide United. Now I'm going to get you to have another crack with Macarthur. What would you be pitching to fans in the Campbelltown area if they're in the Sydney metropolitan area and aren't already fans of Sydney FC or Western Sydney? What would you be saying to try and get them through the gate down and watching either from the bullpen or from one of the other seats?
I would say come on down, because a Macarthur game is the only time you can ring a cowbell in public and not be judged, and it'd be absolutely okay. It'd be socially acceptable. It'd even be encouraged. I mean, I'm all aboard the cowbell. I love the cowbells. I think it's, as a neutral fan, I think it is quite annoying. However, it is quite niche. And I think, I'm on board. I respect it. They've done something different there, and I like it. So that'd be my membership pitch. Come down, ring the cowbell. I mean, have a good time. A bit more into that. I would just say, they've got a great squad. Jump on board. You've got a chance to make the club what you want it to be. You don't want it to be Western United because they're struggling. Make it better than that. That would be my pitch.
Yeah,
great
absolutely.
Pitch.
Great pitch. You nailed it, and then you went back to say don't be Western United, and it took until we played. They did actually submit, and this was only rumoured on Twitter. I don't know 100% how truthful it is, but they've submitted a council application to have a giant cowbell that they're going to ring after goals. Oh. So it's going to be similar to like the the Mariners cannon, or if you follow the MLS, the big log that they cut up in Portland, a whole bunch of these different traditional things that are going to come after goals. If they get that, It'll be pretty fantastic. I like the cowbells. It's
Oh,
something unique, but yeah, like you said, the droning noise is absolutely horrific. Predictions we'll come back into in a moment, but their round one fixture is versus Wellington on Sunday night, the 21st of November. Let's have a look at these PR rankings, Branson. At the moment, as we've said, we've got City, Sydney, Brisbane, Adelaide, who we've just added at fourth, and Central Coast. Where, based on Macarthur's recruitment and what you expect for them this season, would you position them comparative to the other teams?
well, straight off the bat, I'm going to say at least third. I think they are higher than Brisbane, Adelaide, and the Central Coast, despite their massive outs and the caliber of those outs. I think they've done a really good job of being able to replace them with similar caliber players. You know, generally speaking, they might be a slight level down, but you said it before, almost all of these players that they've brought in would be starting at pretty much any other A-League club. So I think they are at least third. I think this is where it now starts to get interesting. Do you have them above Sydney? For me, it's borderline. I think they're neck and neck. I think Sydney obviously have runs on the board. You know, we saw them not regress last year, but sort of fall away a little bit. Haven't been thrilled with their off-season recruitment. I think Macarthur have done a better job than Sydney in that, but I also think Sydney is starting from a higher base. So for me, they're neck and neck. As far as our rankings go, I would still have Sydney above them for the sake of these rankings, but I really do think that they are pretty darn near inseparable. What do you think?
I think their midfield's good. That three, that Noon, De Silva, De Villa is good. I think their defence is okay, but they're going to set up. I think their base and midfield's okay. I don't think they have a striker, and that's mainly just my personal opinion after watching Tommy Urich with Adelaide last year, that he's going to be fit and available the entire time, that he's going to get vaccinated and actually be able to play, because
that's a big question mark.
Big question mark. And even when he is fit and playing a full season, as you've mentioned, I don't know if he's going to be able to get 10 goals for them, even with the service they've got. So that's my big question mark that still remains about Macarthur. I'll put them third. I think if I was doing my own list personally, I would put them below Brisbane and potentially be having a conversation as to where we think they sit against Adelaide, because I think Adelaide has a better defence and potentially base of midfield, but then their forward options, while Goodwin and Halloran are great, they have pretty similar issues as to how they're going to create from that number 10 spot, whereas Macarthur have De Villa, who's obviously exceptional. So I would happily sit them in third, but I don't think they're ahead of Sydney FC, because Sydney FC have proven goal scorers in the likes of Lafondra, in the likes of Bobo, in the likes of Ninkovic, in the likes of Barbarousis. Potentially more players they've spoken about maybe bringing back in as well. So that's why I would put Sydney above them. I think Sydney have proven winners, and I think Macarthur are trying to still aim to get to that stage. So I think third is probably fair.
Yeah, and it's a tricky one as well, because we saw last season on paper you go, wow, if this is a ripper squad, they should be top two. And then they finished sixth. So again, like, you know, having them ahead of Brisbane, on paper, their squad is far superior. Like, if you do a side-by-side comparison, if you look at the caliber of players and the star power, for lack of a better term, that Macarthur have versus Brisbane, I think they're ahead. But, you know, we saw last year that didn't count for a whole lot.
Yeah, so, and it might not count again. They might line up and play. They might not line up and play the exact same way they did last season, just with different pieces. And I don't think that's the answer to try and get them up the pitch either. But third spot, let's see how we go. We'll revisit this, of course, at the end of the season and see how it pans out. But unfortunately, Branson, that brings us to the end for another week. Football doesn't ever stop. There will be more things to talk about, more news highlights, more season previews coming next week. But as always, mate, thank you so much for joining me. I love chatting football and all that sort of stuff with you. Anything else that you want to cover off before we close out for the week?
I'd just say make sure to watch the Matildas. We saw, what was it, during the Olympics, that their games broke records, or were, you know, the most viewed matches. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, so I'm not going to pull out stats, but they had fantastic viewership numbers. It's not a tournament match, it is just a friendly, but, you know, it's back on home soil. It's on Channel 10 in prime time. Very similar circumstances, so make sure to watch it if you're in Sydney and you are going. Fantastic, have a great time. But if you can't, I mean, get around and watch it. Show them some support. I reckon I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, maybe if we're about, we'll do some live Twitter stuff as well, but we'll definitely be recapping that game next week and seeing how we go from there. So absolutely get amongst it. If you aren't already, please go and get vaccinated so we can all go and watch these fantastic games. I'm looking at you, Tommy Urich. And then, of course, if you're not already a member, sign up with your local club, because you will love the A-League, just as we do here on French Island. And it looks like it is shaping up to be one of the best seasons that we've had in the league in quite some time. As always, though, Bran has been Bran. I have been Sean. We'll see you guys again on the island.